words of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount.
You have heard that they were told, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But what I tell you is this: do not resist those that wrong you. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn and offer the left cheek also.
If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, let them have your cloak as well.
If someone in authority presses you into service for 1 mile, go 2.
Give to anyone who asks.
And do not turn your back on anyone who wants to borrow.
You have heard that they were told, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But what I tell you is this: love your enemies and pray for your persecutors. Only so can you be children of your God in heaven, who causes the sun to rise on good and bad alike, and sends the rain on the innocent and the wicked.
If you only love those who love you, what reward can you expect? Even the tax collectors do as much as that.
If you greet only your friends, what is there extraordinary about that? Even the heathen do as much.
There must be no limit to your goodness, for there is no limit in God's goodness.
It was 75 years ago today that President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which authorized any military commander to exclude any person from any place deemed to be of military significance. The order didn't mention any particular group, but there was an understanding among high officials that it had been issued for the detention and removal of people of Japanese ancestry from the West Coast states. Over the next months, 10 sites were built by the U.S. government for the mass incarceration of more than 120,000 people. Lieutenant General DeWitt was the officer designated to execute the presidential order on the West Coast. Initially, his strategy was to ask Japanese American families in our area to move voluntarily, go and relocate east of the Cascades. In the early 1940s, there was a sizable community of Japanese American people living on Bainbridge Island, strawberry growers. 3 of those families made immediate arrangements to move. But on March 24th, DeWitt withdrew permission for this voluntary relocation. Bainbridge Island was the first location to be evacuated. The people were given 6 days to gather their possessions and put their affairs in order. On the morning of March 30th, 1942, Army trucks appeared at island people's homes to transport them to the Eagledale ferry dock, where boats waited to take them to Seattle. Bainbridge Island High School allowed its students to miss school that day so they could say goodbye to their friends. Many students were there to see their friends off, adults too. So a frightened but well-behaved group of Americans, allowed to take only what they could carry, began a journey without knowing where they were going or how long they would be gone. Arriving in Seattle, they were ushered onto a train. Curtains covered the windows. They rode through the night, and on April 1st, they were transferred onto buses, which set off through the California desert. After a few hours, Kay Nakao looked out the window and saw a desolate piece of land with tar paper-covered buildings. She told the woman sitting next to her, "I would hate to live there." Her heart sank when the buses turned into the compound. This was the Manzanar Assembly Center, later the Manzanar Relocation Center, the largest of the 10 detention centers hastily thrown together to house the internees. There were a few Japanese bachelors already living there doing construction work. The Bainbridge Islanders were the first families to arrive. The facilities were very crude. For weeks they had no sewer system. But the nightmare continued even after plumbing was installed. Has anybody here ever been to Manzanar or any of the other camps? went to Manzanar when we were on a vacation at Yosemite. It's in the Owens Valley, east of the Sierras. It's high in elevation, 4,000 feet. The temperature on a summer day when we visited was easily 100 degrees. In winter, it drops below freezing. If you go, those tar paper covered buildings are still there to see. They have no insulation. When the wind blows, which it does most of the time, the air fills with dust. The people got a winter fuel allocation, but it was never enough to ward off the cold. There's barbed wire all the way around the camp, and watchtowers, 8 watchtowers, each of which had a sentry keeping guard. There was no chartered bus home when it ended. Each detainee was given $25 and a one-way ticket to wherever. Some people by that time had nowhere to go and sought to stay in the camp. They were forcibly expelled. But by November 1945, it was all over, except for everything that was involved in 120,000 people trying to put their lives back together again. Last Saturday, when Kathy and I went to our worship workshop over in Seattle, we met a worship leader from Blaine Memorial United Methodist Church in Seattle. She told us that they were a mainly Japanese-American congregation and that their church had been named after the man who was the pastor at First Methodist Church, Seattle, during the war. In February 1942, Reverend Blaine quickly mobilized his congregation. They cleared out the basement of their church and opened the doors to any Japanese-American families who wanted to store their possessions there. So, she said, when they returned in 1945, all their stuff was there, it was safe. That's a shining light in the midst of the memories. Our congregational story is not so good. The General Council of the denomination met in June that year. They passed a resolution saying that while they didn't question that detention was necessary for national security reasons, they deplored the removal of U.S. citizens with no due process to determine their loyalty. I wish that they had said something stronger than that. First Congregational Church Berkeley actually approached the Army and offered their church as a registration site where military personnel could take the details of Japanese-American residents. One woman remembers the shock she felt when she realized that the reason the soldiers were armed wasn't to protect the citizens of Berkeley from the Japanese. It was to protect the Japanese from the citizens of Berkeley. It's a chilling story from start to finish. For a long time, the nation preferred to forget that it had ever happened. Finally, in the 1980s, a congressional commission unearthed the records and interviewed survivors. Their conclusion, and I quote, was that the promulgation of Executive Order 9066 was not justified by military necessity, and the decisions which followed from it were not driven by analysis of military conditions. The broad historical causes which shaped these decisions were race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. Hard, honest words. Following their recommendations, Congress subsequently approved an apology and some symbolic monetary restitution to Americans of Japanese ancestry, and a presidential apology was issued. 120,000 innocent people, torn from the lives they were living, imprisoned, stripped of their livelihoods and possessions, their access to health care, blatant disregard for their rights under the law, family life put under extreme strain, children's schooling disrupted. That presidential apology is only meaningful if we're sure that the lesson has been learned and that such a thing could never, ever happen again. How confident are you feeling? It brings us face to face with one of Christianity's biggest dilemmas, namely that the things we learn about right and wrong from listening to Jesus are assumed not to apply, just not to be relevant in matters of national life, especially when it comes to national security. Forget Christian teaching. We will be invincible. No threat tolerated. Safety is everything. Dominance is our right. The first responsibility of our leaders is to protect us and our interests. Nobody would get to first base in a presidential race unless they convinced us that they'd make a good, tough commander-in-chief. But put it alongside the Sermon on the Mount, and you hardly know what to do. Turn the other cheek, says Jesus. Give them your shirt. Go an extra mile with the bully. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Who does it apply to? It's almost like it's a special set of rules made for victims. Don't defend yourself. Just give yourself over to their abuse. Let them do their worst. Don't you lift a finger. You and I know better because we've seen what can happen when people embrace the way of Jesus. We've seen how holy resistance has overcome violence and persecution and led to powerful and lasting social change. Gandhi's India, Martin Luther King's America. They were nobody's victims. In fact, they shamed their enemies into higher moral standards. They won moral victories even when they suffered physical defeats. We would all agree that the world is a better place because of their convictions. But don't you get the feeling that sometimes the reason we honor them is that so we can go on and ignore them? Just sort of file them away as interesting historical anomalies. There were those just fleeting moments in time when that was the relevant thing to do, special instances in history, because the conditions were just right for that moment. But now back to the reasonable thing, now back to business as usual. Walk softly by all means if you want to, but never let go of your big stick. Because the world is about who can wield the biggest, meanest, scariest stick. $550 billion in this year's federal budget. Watch this space next year. It was, of course, in the name of national security that those 120,000 people were interned in 1942. We understand it. Pearl Harbor had the nation in a panic. Racism kicked in without a blink. I haven't read of anybody who tried very hard to stop it. And when the demand for national security is running at such a fever pitch, it's like you know that there's no point even trying to challenge it. It's like a huge bulldozer that's going to run over you no matter what you do. So here we are, 75 years later. Once again, the rhetoric about national security is being employed to call for measures that run roughshod over people's fundamental human and civil rights. The immigrant raids have started. The travel ban will be back. This week, the members of our church council got an email from me asking for their consent that our church add its signature to a letter that was being circulated. Various other religious groups and civic organizations signed, protesting the seizing of Daniel Ramirez Medina, currently in detention in Tacoma. He's 23 years old, with a job and a young child, and no criminal record. He wasn't born in this country. His parents brought him from Mexico, and they are undocumented. But he's been vetted twice under the DACA scheme, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals scheme, and twice granted permission under the law to stay, to work, to study. That letter went on Friday, and that day the U.S. District Judge in Seattle ruled not to release him. There is going to be another hearing, hopefully this coming week. The Church Council of Greater Seattle has urged us to take a stand in Medina's case because they say it's the first where national hysteria over illegal immigrants has targeted someone who so clearly has wanted to play by the rules and make his contribution to society. It will set a precedent, they say. This is important. But it does feel like we're standing against a bulldozer. The world is a dangerous place, people say. If we're going to be safe, we have to close the borders. We have to build that wall, turn back the refugees, cleanse ourselves of suspicious people from within. And here we stand, clutching on to the Sermon on the Mount. If we're going to prevail against a tidal wave of fear and hysteria, we have to be clear. Violating people's civil rights is wrong. Trampling over due process is wrong. Racism is wrong. We want our nation to stand for what is right. This doesn't mean that we're naive. This is a dangerous world, and the price we'll pay for receiving refugees and honoring the rights of the undocumented is that we may give some bad guys permission to be here. If that happens, we'll have to deal with it. But it's worth it for the sake of honoring the human rights of the innocent. When we compromise on human rights or civil rights, we lose our own soul. We lose our moral authority in the eyes of the other nations of the world. This isn't going to be an easy argument to win. We will need to be very firm. But one thing helps. Read the words of Jesus. Read them again. And see that he wasn't asking anything of us that he wasn't himself prepared to do. He lived in a really dangerous world too. Turn the other cheek. Let them take your clothing. Love your enemy. Pray for those who persecute you. It could be a program for what happened to Jesus and how he responded. When he stood in front of his accusers, not saying a word, just taking their abuse, they all mocked him for weakness. But from where we stand, we know who was strong and who was weak. And maybe there's a clue in there, something to hang on to. In any given moment, someone is going to look strong and impressive, while somebody else looks weak and pathetic. But it's not always how it turns out. We belong to a people who like to look strong. All we're saying is that we want to be people who actually are strong, because they stand by their principles, even when it's frightening, especially maybe when it's frightening. There's no limit to God's goodness, Jesus told us. There must be no limit to ours.